He doesn't even know the difference between accounts receivable and accounts payable, Sarah. James slammed his laptop shut, his voice echoing through the empty conference room. Your brother hasn't worked a day in finance, and now he's going to control $10 million? This isn't just nepotism. It's corporate suicide. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra. Special for you. I stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across Lake Michigan. My father's words still rang in my ears. Mark needs this opportunity. He's family. You'll understand when you're a parent. Crystal paperweight, a gift from the investors I'd spent 18 months courting, felt cold and heavy in my palm. I'd secured the largest investment in Wilson Manufacturing's 60-year history, and my reward was watching my chronically unemployed brother get handed the financial reins. He'll report to you, my father had insisted, not meeting my eyes. Nothing really changes. Except everything had changed. The trust was broken. The message was clear. Blood trumped merit, and my decade of sacrifice meant nothing compared to my brother's Y chromosome. James, our operations director and my closest ally, paced behind me. So what are you going to do? Just accept it? Let 3 generations of work go down in flames because your dad can't see past his own bias? The question hung in the air as my phone lit up with a notification. Another congratulatory message from our lead investor. Excited to see Wilson. Manufacturing enter its next chapter of growth with you at the helm of finance, Sarah. Your vision for the company's future sealed the deal for us. They didn't know. No one outside the family conference room knew that the architect of the expansion plan wouldn't be the one implementing it. That the financial projections they'd staked $10 million on had been created by someone who would now be relegated to advising her brother. I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. Sarah, wait. The executive team meeting is in 30 minutes, James called after me. Your dad expects you there to support Mark's transition. I paused at the threshold, my hand tight on the doorframe. Tell them I'm sick. It wasn't a lie. I was sick of being the reliable daughter, the one who'd postponed grad school when Mom got sick, who'd stepped in to modernize our outdated manufacturing processes when Dad couldn't adapt to digital transformation. Sick of watching Mark drift in and out of the company when he needed money, always landing in positions created just for him, while I worked 60-hour weeks proving myself worthy of the Wilson name. The elevator carried me down 38 floors, each descending number on the display panel matching the sinking feeling in my chest. By the time I hit the lobby, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to that meeting. I wasn't going to smile and pretend this was okay. I was finally going to put myself first. The taxi dropped me at Navy Pier, the one place in Chicago where I could always think clearly. As a child, my grandfather would bring me here when the pressure of being a Wilson became too much. The water puts things in perspective, he'd say, pointing at the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. Our problems are temporary, but this is forever. Grandpa Jacob had built Wilson Manufacturing from a small metal shop into a regional leader in precision parts. He'd hoped my father would expand it further, but Thomas Wilson was more a caretaker than a visionary. He'd kept things running, maintained the status quo, content with steady, if unspectacular, growth. It was expected that Mark, as the firstborn son, would eventually take over, continuing the patriarchal succession that had worked for 2 generations. But Mark had different ideas. While I completed my business degree with honors and joined the company immediately, my brother bounced between abandoned college majors, failed startups, and finding himself on extended trips abroad. Each time he returned broke and directionless, Dad would create another VP position with an impressive title and minimal responsibilities. I'd built my entire life around Wilson Manufacturing. when my college friends headed to New York or San Francisco for lucrative jobs, I stayed in Chicago. When Mom's cancer required round-the-clock care, I worked from her hospital room while Mark was too emotionally fragile to visit regularly. When our major clients threatened to leave because our production methods were becoming obsolete, I researched and implemented the automation systems that saved millions. And when it became clear that we needed external investment to compete in an increasingly globalized market, I was the one who created the pitch deck, networked at industry events, and eventually secured meetings with the Midwestern Manufacturing Investment Consortium. The investors had been skeptical at first. Wilson is stable, but what's going to change to deliver the growth you're projecting? The lead investor, Diane Garrett, had asked during our first meeting. For 18 months, I meticulously addressed every concern, refined financial projections, and developed a 5-year growth strategy that would expand our reach nationally. I convinced them that Wilson Manufacturing wasn't just another family-run, legacy business resistant to change. We were poised for transformation. The morning I received confirmation of the $10 million investment commitment had been the proudest of my career. I'd called Dad immediately, my voice trembling with excitement. "They're in, Dad, all of them. Full ask, minimal conditions." His response had been typically understated. "That's good news, Sarah. Let's discuss next steps tomorrow." No congratulations, no recognition of the mountains I'd moved. I'd assumed the next steps would include formalizing my position as CFO, the role I'd been unofficially performing for years. Instead, at the family dinner that evening, Dad had cleared his throat and announced, "Mark will be returning to the company as financial director to manage the expansion." My fork had frozen midway to my mouth. "What?" "Your brother has had time to mature," Dad continued, smiling at Mark. "He's ready for responsibility now. Mark at least had the decency to look uncomfortable." "It'll be a team effort, Sar. I'll need your guidance." But it wasn't a team effort. It was a theft of my achievement, my rightful position, and my future. The investors had backed my vision, my financial acumen. They'd seen what my father couldn't, that I was the future of Wilson Manufacturing. Standing at the edge of the pier now, watching boats sway gently in the late afternoon light, I felt something crystallize within me. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to prove myself worthy of a place that should have been mine by merit. I'd dimmed my light to avoid outshining my brother, softened my voice to protect my father's ego, and swallowed my ambition to maintain family harmony. And what had it gotten me? A front-row seat to watch someone else take credit for my hard work. My phone vibrated incessantly. Texts from James about the meeting, a missed call from Dad, a calendar alert for tomorrow's investor introduction. I silenced it all and began to walk, no destination in mind except away. 3 hours later, I found myself outside Lisa Chen's apartment in Wicker Park. Lisa and I had been roommates in college, and while our paths had diverged, she'd gone on. To become a venture capital analyst in San Francisco, we'd remained close. She was back in Chicago visiting family and had been trying to get me to meet up all week. I hesitated before ringing the bell. Lisa had never understood why I stayed at Wilson. "With your talent, you could be running finance for any major corporation," she'd say during our phone calls, "or starting your own business. Why waste yourself trying to impress people who can't see your value?" I never had a good answer. Family loyalty? Obligation? The hope that eventually my dedication would be recognized. None of those reasons seemed compelling anymore. Lisa's face registered surprise when she opened the door. "Sarah, what are you—" "They gave it to Mark," I said, my voice hollow. "The financial directorship, after everything I did to secure the investment." Her expression shifted from surprise to anger. "Those absolute—" She caught herself. "Come in. This calls for something stronger than coffee." Inside, over glasses of bourbon, I told her everything. The years of being overlooked, the exhaustion of constantly proving myself, and finally, the devastating betrayal of watching my unqualified brother be handed control of the financial future I'd built. "So what now?" Lisa asked when I finished, her analytical mind already moving to solutions. "Legal action? Whistleblowing to the investors?" I shook my head. "I couldn't do that to the company, to the employees who depend on those jobs." "Then what, Sarah? Because going back tomorrow and pretending this is fine isn't an option. Not if you want to look at yourself in the mirror." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was right. The thought of returning to that conference room, of nodding supportively while Mark fumbled through the financial strategy I'd crafted, made me physically ill. "I think I need to leave," I said, the words surprising me even as they left my mouth. Not just take a vacation or a sabbatical, actually leave Wilson Manufacturing. The moment I said it aloud, something shifted inside me. A weight lifting, possibilities opening. Lisa studied me for a long moment, then reached for her laptop. "If you're serious, I have something to show you." She pulled up a presentation, deck for a manufacturing technology startup based in Seattle, Vertex Innovations. They're revolutionizing the supply chain for precision manufacturers with AI optimization software. They've got brilliant engineers, but need someone who understands both manufacturing finance and digital transformation from the inside. Someone exactly like you. "You want me to join a startup?" The idea seemed absurd. I'd spent my career in the stability of a family business, navigating office politics but never truly risking failure. "I want you to interview," Lisa corrected. "They've been searching for a CFO for months. The compensation package includes equity, significant equity." "I can't just abandon my family," I protested weakly, even as a part of me recognized the irony. Hadn't they just abandoned me? Lisa leaned forward. "Sarah, I'm going to say something as your friend, not as a VC. Your family is taking advantage of your loyalty. They're counting on you being too afraid to leave. But what if this isn't about abandoning them? What if it's about finally becoming who you're meant to be?" Sleep eluded me that night on Lisa's pull-out couch. My mind raced with possibilities and fears. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called James before heading to the office. "I'm coming in to resign," I told him, my voice steadier than I expected. His sharp intake of breath was audible. "Sarah, think about this. Maybe if we talk to your dad together—" "I've thought about nothing else for 24 hours. I cut him off. "This isn't a negotiation tactic. I deserve better, and I'm finally going to find it." The Wilson Manufacturing building looked different as I approached it that morning, as if already becoming a place from my past rather than the center of my present. I rode the elevator to the executive floor, ignoring curious glances from employees who'd heard about my absence from yesterday's meeting. Dad was alone in his office, reviewing documents with reading glasses perched low on his nose. And image so familiar it made my chest ache despite everything. He looked up, relief washing over his face. "Sarah, there you are. We were worried when you didn't show yesterday. Are you feeling better?" I placed my resignation letter on his desk, the single page representing both an ending and a beginning. "I'm leaving Wilson Manufacturing, effective immediately." He stared at the letter without touching it, as if it might burn him. "What is this? Some kind of protest? If this is about Mark—" "It's about me," I interrupted, surprising us both with my firmness. "I've accepted a position with another company." "Another company?" The concept seemed to genuinely confuse him. Wilson's had been our identity for 3 generations. What company could possibly— "A technology startup that's innovating in our space. They value what I bring to the table. They're offering me the C-suite position I've earned." Dad removed his glasses, suddenly looking older. "You can't do this, Sarah. The investment, the expansion plan was your project. You have responsibilities. Here." My responsibility to myself has to come first for once, I said, my voice softening slightly. I created that expansion plan, and yes, I secured that investment. But you decided I wasn't the right person to implement it. That's your choice to make as CEO. This is mine to make as your daughter, and as a professional who knows her worth. This is about your brother, he said flatly. You're jealous. The accusation would have wounded me deeply just days ago. Now, it merely confirmed I was making the right choice. This is about recognizing a pattern and choosing not to participate in it anymore, I corrected him. Mark will sink or swim on his own merits now, and so will I. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. The investors backed your plan, Sarah. They trust you. What am I supposed to tell them? I faced him one last time. The truth, Dad, that you chose family loyalty over business sense. That's your right as owner, but actions have consequences. Walking out of Wilson Manufacturing that day was simultaneously the hardest and easiest thing I'd ever done. Hard because I was leaving behind not just a job, but an identity, a legacy, a future I'd spent years building. Easy because with each step away from the building, I felt lighter, freer, more myself than I had in years. I flew to Seattle 3 days later for in-person interviews with Vertex Innovations. The company's headquarters couldn't have been more different from Wilson's traditional office tower, a converted warehouse in the South Lake Union District, filled with natural light, collaborative spaces, and energy that was palpable from the moment I walked in. The CEO, Michael Reeves, was younger than me by several years, but possessed a clarity of vision that reminded me of my grandfather. Your background is fascinating, he said as he showed me around. Most candidates we see from traditional manufacturing either don't truly understand digital transformation or are so enamored with technology that they've lost touch with practical operations. You bridge both worlds. The interview process was rigorous, financial scenarios to analyze, strategic, questions to address, team dynamics to navigate. But for the first time in my career, I felt fully seen and evaluated on my actual capabilities, not through the lens of being Thomas Wilson's daughter or Mark's more reliable sister. When they offered me the position of Chief Financial Officer, with an equity package that could potentially dwarf my Wilson salary, I accepted on the spot. I can start in 2 weeks, I told Michael, already mentally planning my move across the country. Actually, he replied, we're presenting at the National Manufacturing Innovation Conference in Chicago next month. If you could join us there, it would be an ideal introduction to our client base. My stomach dropped. The conference was the premier industry event of the year, and Wilson Manufacturing would certainly be there, showcasing their new investment and expansion plans. Is that going to be a problem? Michael asked, noting my hesitation. I squared my shoulders. Not at all. It's the perfect opportunity to begin this transition. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into preparations for my move. I found a month-to-month, furnished apartment in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, arranged for my things to be shipped, and began the process of disentangling my life from Wilson Manufacturing. The hardest part was saying goodbye to colleagues who'd become family over the years. James organized a discreet farewell gathering at a bar far from our usual haunts. To avoid company spies, he'd joked, though we both knew he was creating space away from the awkwardness of my departure. They're already struggling, he confided after a few drinks, loyalty to me battling with his commitment to the company. Mark presented the financial projections to the department heads yesterday. He couldn't answer basic questions about the assumptions behind the models. I felt a twinge of vindication followed immediately by guilt. They'll figure it out, I said, not entirely believing it. Dad will hire someone qualified to support him. James gave me a knowing look. That someone was supposed to be you. News of my departure had spread quickly through the industry. I received LinkedIn messages from competitors, cautious inquiries from Wilson clients, and a particularly pointed email from Diane Garrett, the the lead investor. Unexpected personnel changes following major investments concern me. I'd appreciate your perspective over coffee. I met her at a quiet cafe in the financial district, unsure what I could ethically say, but knowing I owed her some explanation. I'm not asking you to disparage your family's company, Diane clarified once we were seated, but I backed that investment largely because of you, Sarah. Your absence from the equation changes the risk profile. My father made a succession choice that I disagreed with, I said carefully. I chose to pursue an opportunity that better recognizes my contributions. Diane nodded slowly. At Vertex Innovations, I know Michael Reeves, brilliant technologist. Their platform could transform manufacturing logistics if properly scaled. She studied me over her coffee cup. It's a bold move, leaving security for a startup. Sometimes bold moves are necessary for growth, I replied. She smiled slightly. Indeed. Well, I wish you success in your new venture. Wilson's loss is certainly Vertex's gain. As she gathered her things to leave, she added, The manufacturing world is smaller than most people realize, Sarah. I suspect our paths will cross again soon. I didn't fully understand the significance of her words until the National Manufacturing Innovation Conference arrived 4 weeks later. I'd been working remotely for Vertex for nearly a month, immersing myself in their technology and financial models, helping refine their investor pitch for the conference. The event occupied the entire Chicago Convention Center, with hundreds of exhibitors ranging from industrial giants to emerging tech companies. Vertex had a modest but strategic booth location near the Innovation Showcase. Wilson Manufacturing had secured prime real estate near the entrance, a testament to their longevity in the industry and the buzz around their recent investment. I spotted them immediately upon entering the main hall, Dad looking distinguished. In his customary tailored suit, Mark uncomfortable, but trying to project confidence in a new position he was clearly struggling to navigate, and James running interference when conversations became too technically complex for either of them. My Vertex colleagues were too focused on our upcoming presentation to notice my distraction. We were launching our new supply chain optimization platform, a solution that could potentially save manufacturers like Wilson millions in efficiency gains. The financial impact projections are the key selling point, Michael reminded me as we rehearsed. Your manufacturing background makes those numbers credible. When you explain how this reduces costs by 22% while improving delivery reliability, people believe it coming from you. I nodded, pushing thoughts of my family's nearby booth from my mind. This was my new path, and I needed to focus on making it successful. Our presentation was scheduled for the second day in the main auditorium. As I reviewed my notes backstage, a familiar voice made me look up. I heard a rumor you'd be here. Mark stood awkwardly in the wings, looking both out of place and strangely vulnerable in a suit that still had the polished sheen of newness. Hello, Mark, I said, keeping my voice neutral. How's the conference going for Wilson? He shrugged, the gesture so reminiscent of our childhood that it momentarily softened my resolve. It would be better if you were there. Dad won't admit it, but we're struggling without you. The investors ask questions I don't know how to answer. You'll figure it out, I said, echoing my earlier words to James with even less conviction. That's what financial directors do. He winced. I never asked for that title, Sarah. Dad announced it without even discussing it with me first. But you accepted it, I pointed out. You could have declined. You could have said, this position should go to Sarah. And disappoint Dad again? Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized all too well. You've always been stronger than me that way. You can stand up to him, I just fold. For the first time, I saw my brother clearly, not as the favored son who'd taken what should have been mine, but as someone trapped in the same dysfunctional family system, just with different expectations and pressures. What do you want, Mark? Why are you here? His eyes met mine directly. To ask you to come back. Not for Dad, not even for me, for the company, for the people who depend on those jobs. I'm in over my head and everyone knows it. Something inside me softened, even as I knew my answer. Couldn't change. I can't come back. Not as your advisor or Dad's right hand. I've found something that's mine, where I'm valued for exactly who I am. I understand, he said quietly. I just needed to try. A stage manager approached, signaling, 5 minutes until our presentation. Mark nodded in acknowledgement of my time constraint. Good luck out there, he said, turning to leave. Dad and I will be in the audience. He'd never admit it, but I think he wants to see what you're doing now. What was worth leaving us for? The knowledge that my father and brother would be watching sent a wave of anxiety through me, followed by a strange sense of liberation. For years, I'd measured my words and achievements against their potential reactions. Today, I would simply be the CFO of Vertex Innovations, presenting a revolutionary product that I believed in. Our presentation exceeded all expectations. Michael's technical explanation of the platform laid the groundwork, but when I stepped forward to detail the financial impact, speaking the language of manufacturing executives with an authenticity born from years on factory floors, I could feel the room's energy shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. In the Q&A session, I found myself fielding most of the questions, translating complex technological advantages into clear business benefits. From the corner of my eye, I could see my father in the third row, his expression unreadable, but his attention unwavering. Afterward, as potential clients crowded our booth, I caught glimpses of familiar faces from Wilson Manufacturing, suppliers curious about our technology, employees I'd worked with stopping by to offer congratulations, even James giving me a subtle thumbs up from across the aisle. It was Diane Garrett's appearance at our booth that changed everything. After a detailed conversation with Michael and me about Vertex's technology, she looked between us thoughtfully. I've been considering something since our coffee meeting, Sarah, she said. Wilson Manufacturing has the production capabilities and client base. Vertex has the technological solution that could revolutionize how those capabilities are deployed. Have you considered a strategic partnership rather than competing separately? Michael's eyes lit up with possibility. We've been looking for a manufacturing partner to pilot our full integration. Wilson would never, I began, then stopped myself. The old Sarah would have known exactly what Wilson Manufacturing would or wouldn't do, because those decisions were made within a closed family system I'd been part of. The new Sarah didn't presume to speak for her former company. It would be worth exploring, I amended. Diane smiled. Perhaps a conversation is in order, one that includes all relevant parties. That evening, in a private dining room at the Conference Hotel, I found myself seated across from my father and brother, with Michael, Diane, and 2 other investors flanking us. The tension was palpable as waiters served drinks and disappeared discreetly. Dad broke the silence first. Your presentation was impressive today, he said, addressing me with a formality that barely masked his discomfort. It seems you've found a good fit at Vertex. Thank you, I replied simply. Diane took control of the conversation then, outlining her vision for a strategic partnership. Wilson Manufacturing would become the primary implementation partner for Vertex's technology, gaining efficiency advantages over competitors, while Vertex would secure a flagship client to demonstrate real-world applications. The synergy potential is remarkable, she concluded. Wilson's recent investment could be partially redirected to this integration, with potentially greater returns than the original expansion plan. My father listened thoughtfully, occasionally glancing at Mark, who seemed increasingly relieved, as the conversation progressed beyond his financial depth. And who would oversee this partnership from the Wilson side? Dad finally asked, the question hanging heavy with implication. Before anyone could respond, Mark pushed back his chair. Slightly, it should be someone who understands both the financial implications and the operational realities. he said, looking directly at our father. Someone who can translate between the manufacturing world and the technology innovations. Dad's eyebrows rose slightly. You're suggesting we need to hire someone new? Mark shook his head. I'm suggesting I'm not the right person for this. I never was. He turned to me. Sarah should have been financial director. We all know it. The admission hung in the air, stunning in its simplicity and honesty. Michael leaned forward. What if we structured this differently? A joint venture between Wilson and Vertex, with shared leadership. Sarah could serve as the bridge between our companies without having to choose one over the other. I looked at my father, searching his face for any indication of what he was thinking. The proud man who never admitted mistakes, who'd built his life around certain unshakable beliefs about family and legacy, seemed suddenly older and less certain. Would you consider it? He asked me directly. Not coming back exactly as you left, but building something new between these two companies? It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a full acknowledgement of the injustice that had driven me away. But it was perhaps as close as Thomas Wilson could come to recognizing that he'd made a mistake. I'd need certain guarantees, I said carefully. Equal decision-making authority, board representation, equity in the joint venture. Dad nodded slowly. That seems reasonable, for both companies' benefit. As the dinner concluded with tentative plans for next steps, Mark pulled me aside. I'm sorry, he said simply. I should have refused the position when he offered it. I just didn't have the courage. And now? I asked. A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. Now I think I'm finding it. Sometimes it takes seeing someone else brave enough to walk away to realize you can choose your own path too. Outside the hotel, the Chicago night spread before me, the familiar skyline now representing not just my past, but possibly part of my future as well. On very different terms. Michael joined me as I waited for a taxi. Are you sure about this? He asked. No one would blame you if you wanted nothing more to do with your family's company. I considered his question carefully. 6 weeks ago, I would have said I needed to leave Wilson completely to find myself. Now I realize I don't have to choose between honoring my past and creating my future. I can build something that includes both, but on my terms, with my worth recognized. The joint venture took shape over the following months, transforming both companies in ways none of us had fully anticipated. Wilson Manufacturing became a technology-forward operation with Vertex's systems at its core. Vertex gained manufacturing expertise and a showcase implementation that attracted new clients across the industry. Dad remained CEO of Wilson, but with a gradually diminishing role, as he began considering retirement. Mark found his actual strengths in client relations, stepping away from financial leadership to become Wilson's chief revenue officer, a position that played to his natural charisma without requiring skills he didn't possess. And I divided my time between Seattle and Chicago, holding dual titles as CFO of Vertex and chairperson of the joint venture, Vertex Solutions. The arrangement satisfied both my need for independence and my connection to the family legacy, transformed into something I could genuinely be proud of. At the 1-year anniversary celebration of our partnership, held in the same hotel where the initial dinner had taken place, my father asked to speak privately with me on the terrace overlooking the city. I was wrong, he said simply, the 3 words I'd never expected to hear from him. I let old ideas about family and succession blind me to what was right in front of me. It nearly cost us everything. The company, our relationship, your talent. It wasn't just about the title, Dad, I said carefully. It was about being seen, being valued for what I contribute, not just tolerated as the reliable daughter. He nodded, looking out at the skyline. Your grandfather would be proud of what you've built. He always said Wilson Manufacturing would need to evolve to survive. He just didn't know it would take his granddaughter to make it happen. We stood in comfortable silence then, the past not erased but transformed, much like the company itself, into something that honored tradition while creating space for new growth. I thought about the journey of the past year, from betrayal to escape to reconstruction on new terms. I'd walked away from what I thought was my only possible future, only to help create something better than I could have imagined. Not by compromising my worth or accepting less than I deserved, but by finally recognizing that sometimes leaving is the only way to find your way back home, on your own terms. The Seattle rain welcomed me as I stepped off the plane, a fitting backdrop for the uncertainty swirling inside me. 2 suitcases and a laptop bag contained everything I'd decided to bring for this new chapter. The rest of my Chicago life boxed up in a storage unit, a physical manifestation of my indecision. Was this a temporary adventure or a permanent relocation? I wasn't ready to answer that question yet. My temporary apartment in Ballard looked nothing like the meticulously decorated condo I'd left behind. Functional IKEA furniture, generic landscapes on the walls, and a kitchen with the bare minimum of supplies. But the view of Puget Sound from the small balcony stirred something in me. The vastness of the water, the distant Olympic mountains emerging when the clouds parted. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that Chicago's architectural precision had never offered. I'd given myself the weekend to settle before starting at Vertex on Monday. Unpacking took less than an hour, another stark reminder of how completely I'd uprooted my life. The silence afterward was deafening. In Chicago, there was always somewhere to be, someone calling with a work emergency, family obligations looming. Here, nobody knew me. Nobody needed me. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. My phone lit up with a text from Lisa. "Landed safe? Apartment decent? First round's on me when you're settled." Lisa had returned to San Francisco but promised to visit Seattle soon. Her friendship had been my lifeline during this transition. The one person who understood why I'd had to leave without trying to pull me back. "All good," I replied, not quite ready to elaborate on the hollow feeling in my stomach. "Starting work Monday. We'll call you after." Another message appeared, James checking in from Chicago. "Office is chaos. Your brother asked where we keep the quarterly projections. The ones you literally presented last month. Miss your competence." I smiled despite myself but didn't respond. The updates from Wilson Manufacturing were like picking at a scab, satisfying in a perverse way, but ultimately preventing the wound from healing. Sunday night, I meticulously laid out my outfit for the first day. The charcoal pantsuit that had been my armor during investor meetings, a silk blouse in deep teal, the pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. Professional, polished, proven. The woman who would walk into Vertex tomorrow would appear confident and composed, regardless of the doubts churning beneath the surface. Sleep evaded me. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying and pulled out my laptop, reviewing Vertex's financial statements for the dozenth time. The company was pre-profitability, but had a solid runway, impressive technology, and a clear path to market. The risk was calculated, but real. If they failed to gain traction, my decision to leave Wilson would look like the impulsive mistake my father already thought it was. The thought of his disappointment still had the power to tighten my chest. Thomas Wilson had never been demonstrative, but his approval had been the currency of my childhood. Good grades, extra responsibilities, perfect attendance, each achievement another deposit in the bank of earning his respect. Mark had given up that game early, choosing instead to charm his way through failures with a smile and a promise to do better next time. I'd never had that luxury. As the reliable one, the standard was perfection. Watching the Seattle sunrise paint the water in shades of pink and gold, I wondered when I'd decided that my worth was tied to my father's validation, and more importantly, how I would define success without it. The Vertex office buzzed with the energy of potential when I arrived Monday morning. Developers huddled around screens, salespeople gesticulated during calls, and the design team sketched, furiously on tablets, Michael met me at the door, coffee in hand. "Welcome to the controlled chaos," he grinned, handing me the cup. "I remember you take it black, right?" The small consideration, that he'd noticed how I took my coffee during our interviews, was so unexpected that I almost missed his next words. "Team meeting in 15 to introduce you. Then I figured you'd want to dive into the financials. Get your bearings. Your office is this way. It's not fancy, but the view's decent." Not fancy was an understatement. The small glass-walled space had a desk, chair, computer, and little else. But the entire western wall was window, framing the Seattle skyline and distant water. At Wilson, I'd worked my way up to a corner office with custom furniture and art, selected by an interior designer. This space was utilitarian, bordering on Spartan. "It's perfect," I said, surprising myself by meaning it. The team meeting was unlike any I'd experienced at Wilson. 30 people crowded into a conference room, designed for 20, some sitting cross-legged on the floor, others perched on windowsills. Michael introduced me briefly. "This is Sarah Wilson, our new CFO, financial genius and manufacturing insider," before moving on to product updates, sales projections, and engineering challenges. The informality was jarring. People interrupted with questions, challenged assumptions openly, and occasionally erupted into debates that Michael let run for a few minutes before gently redirecting. No one took formal notes. No one referred to anyone as Mr. or Ms. The hierarchy that had been so rigid at Wilson seemed fluid here, based on expertise rather than title or tenure. When Michael asked if I wanted to say anything, I faltered, momentarily. My prepared remarks about financial discipline and strategic growth suddenly seemed stiff and out of place. "I'm excited to be here," I said instead, scanning the curious faces. "I've spent my career in traditional manufacturing, watching the industry struggle with exactly the problems Vertex is solving. I believe in what you're building, and I'm here to help turn brilliant technology into a sustainable business." The genuine smiles that greeted this simpler truth eased something in me. These people didn't care about my family name or legacy. They cared about whether I could help their vision succeed. After the meeting, a developer named Raj lingered. "I've been working on the cost modeling algorithms," he said. "The ones that help manufacturers optimize their supply chains. But I'm not sure our assumptions about inventory carrying costs are realistic. Could I show you what I'm thinking?" At Wilson, department boundaries were sacrosanct. Engineers engineered, accountants counted, and crossing those lines invited territorial defensiveness. Here was someone asking for my financial expertise to improve a technical product, not as a perfunctory approval, but as a genuine collaboration. "Absolutely," I said. "Let's find a conference room." That first conversation with Raj set the pattern for my early days at Vertex. I found myself pulled into discussions about product features, pricing models, and client implementations, areas that would have been neatly separated at Wilson, but were delightfully entangled here. My manufacturing knowledge became an unexpected asset, helping the technical team understand the real-world constraints their algorithms needed to accommodate. By the end of my first week, the bare office had accumulated signs of life, a plant. From the marketing team, whiteboard walls covered in financial projections, and a Seattle skyline photo gifted by Michael's assistant. I'd stayed past 8 every night, not from obligation but genuine absorption in the work. On Friday evening, Michael stopped by as I was still working. "Beers on the roof deck," he said. "Team tradition. No shop talk allowed." The rooftop gathering was another culture shock. People played cornhole and argued good-naturedly about music while sharing pizza and local microbrews. Michael's partner brought their dog, who made rounds collecting pets from everyone. The CTO mixed elaborate cocktails at a makeshift bar. It was casual in a way that Wilson Manufacturing's formal quarterly dinners had never been. I hung back at first, nursing a beer at the edge of the group, watching these people who now constituted my professional world interact as friends. A woman with bright purple hair approached. Sonia, I remembered, head of user experience. "First week survivor," she said, raising her glass in salute. "Verdict?" "It's different," I admitted. "My last job, we had organizational charts with neat boxes and clear reporting lines. Everyone knew exactly where they stood." Sonia laughed. "Sounds suffocating. Here, it's messier but more honest. You contribute where you can add value, not just where your title says you should." "I'm still adjusting," I admitted. 20 years of corporate structure is hard to unlearn." 20 years? How old are you?" Sonia looked genuinely confused. I realized with a start that most of my new colleagues probably assumed I was in my early 30s, not approaching 40. At Wilson, my age had been known to everyone, another piece of my fixed identity as Thomas Wilson's daughter. Here, I was being evaluated solely on my current contributions, not my history. "Old enough to know better, young enough to start over," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. The evening loosened something in me. I found myself laughing at the CTO's terrible puns, joining a heated debate about sci-fi movies, and even taking a turn at cornhole, badly. These people weren't just colleagues, they were becoming a community. As the gathering wound down, Michael joined me at the railing overlooking the city lights. "How are you really doing with all this change?" he asked, his question gentler than his usual direct style. "Honestly, it's disorienting," I admitted, "like stepping into a parallel universe where all the rules are different." He nodded. "Big companies have their own gravity. They pull everything into familiar patterns. Startups are more like building the airplane while you're flying it. That's not exactly reassuring for the new financial officer." I laughed. "True, but you didn't come here for certainty, did you? If you wanted safe, you would have stayed at Wilson." The question hit deeper than he could have known. Why had I really left? The obvious answer was my brother's unearned promotion, but the truth ran deeper. I'd been suffocating under the weight of expectations and limitations that had nothing to do with my abilities and everything to do with my place in the Wilson hierarchy. "I came here to build something that matters," I said finally. "Something that reflects my vision, not just my family's." Michael studied me for a moment. "Then you're in the right place. Just remember, that airplane we're building? You're not just along for the ride. You're one of the chief architects now." The responsibility of that role hit me fully the following Monday, when Michael announced we'd be pitching for Series B funding 3 months earlier than planned. "Our current runway is shorter than we'd like with the new hires and expanded development," he explained in our leadership meeting. "Sarah, I'll need you to lead this round." The room, our CTO Logan, head of sales Audrey, and Michael all looked at me expectantly. At Wilson, funding decisions involved months of planning, layers of approvals, and endless committee meetings. Here, major financial decisions were made with the casual confidence of people used to navigating uncertainty. 3 months is aggressive," I said carefully. "Our Q3 projections won't have real customer data to back them up yet." "That's the catch-22, Logan pointed out. "We need the funding to scale fast enough to land the enterprise clients who would give us that data. So we're essentially asking investors to bridge our credibility gap," I clarified. Michael nodded. "Exactly. And you're the bridge, Sarah. Your background gives us legitimacy with traditional investors that we wouldn't have otherwise." The realization was both flattering and terrifying. They'd hired me partly for the very industry experience I'd been trying to distance myself from. My Wilson manufacturing pedigree, the name I'd been running from, was now one of my most valuable assets. "I'll need to completely redesign our pitch deck," I said, mind already racing through the necessary changes, "and develop much more robust financial projections." "Whatever you need," Michael agreed. "This is your show to run." The next few weeks blurred into a relentless rhythm of financial modeling, investor research, and presentation refinement. I worked 14-hour days, fueled by coffee and the adrenaline of creation. This wasn't like securing funding for Wilson, where the company's longevity and my father's connections had done half the work. Here, every number needed to tell a compelling story about Vertex's potential. I reached out to Lisa for insights on the current venture capital climate. Her position at a major VC firm gave her valuable perspective on what investors were looking for in manufacturing technology plays. Supply chain optimization is hot right now, she confirmed during one of our late-night calls. But they'll grill you on customer acquisition costs and time to implementation. Traditional manufacturers are notoriously slow adopters. Not all of them, I countered, thinking of the more progressive clients I'd worked with at Wilson. The labor shortages and supply chain disruptions since the pandemic have made even the dinosaurs more open to technology solutions. That's your angle then, Lisa said. You know both worlds. Use that. I threw myself into crafting a narrative that bridged the gap between manufacturing's cautious traditions and technology's optimistic future. The pitch needed to reassure venture capitalists that we understood the practical challenges while convincing them that our solution was revolutionary enough to justify their investment. Late one evening, staring at financial projections that refused to align with our growth expectations, I finally did something I'd been avoiding. I called James. Wilson Manufacturing, Operations. His familiar voice answered, clearly not checking. Caller ID. It's me, I said. Do you have a minute? His surprise was audible. Sarah? Of course. Are you okay? I need some real-world input. What's the actual implementation time for new supply chain software in a mid-sized manufacturing operation? Not the vendor promise, the reality. James chuckled. Well, the vendor says 3 months, reality is 9 to 12, and even then you're looking at partial adoption while the old-timers keep their Excel spreadsheets running in parallel. The honest assessment was exactly what I needed. And what would make that timeline shorter? What's the biggest barrier? Besides the usual resistance to change? He paused, considering. Integration with existing systems. Training that actually makes sense to floor supervisors, not just IT people. And visible wins early. Something that makes even the skeptics say, okay, this is actually better than what we've been doing. His insights were gold, the kind of practical knowledge that Silicon Valley engineers often missed when designing solutions for traditional industries. We talked for nearly an hour, diving into the nitty-gritty of manufacturing operations and how technology implementations succeeded or failed in the real world. You sound good, Sarah, James said as our call wound down. Different. More yourself. Somehow. The observation caught me off guard. What do you mean? At Wilson, you were always so careful, measuring every word, considering every angle. You sound more direct now, more confident. Was that true? Had I been constraining myself without even realizing it? The thought stayed with me long after we hung up, prompting a late-night email to the Vertex development team with suggestions for making our implementation process more manufacturing-friendly. The next morning, Logan was waiting at my office. Tursiadat, these suggestions you sent, they're brilliant, especially the phased rollout approach for the production floor. Where did this come from? I hesitated, unsure whether mentioning my consultation with Wilson's operations director would be seen as divided loyalty. I spent years watching technology implementations fail on factory floors. The suggestions come from seeing those mistakes firsthand. He nodded approvingly. This is exactly why we needed you. The engineering team can build amazing tools, but we don't always understand how they'll land in the real world. His validation sparked something inside me, pride in my manufacturing knowledge rather than a desire to escape it. Perhaps I didn't need to reject my past to embrace this future. Perhaps there was strength in being a bridge between worlds. That revelation transformed my approach to the funding pitch. Instead of positioning Vertex as a revolutionary disruptor that would render traditional manufacturing obsolete, I crafted a narrative of thoughtful evolution, technology that respected the industry's practical constraints while solving its most pressing problems. When we gathered to review the draft pitch deck, Audrey let out a low whistle. This is not what I expected, but it's compelling as hell. Michael studied the projections with unusual intensity. You're forecasting slower initial adoption, but much higher retention and expansion rates within existing clients. Traditional manufacturing moves cautiously but commits deeply, I explained. We'll win fewer clients initially, but they'll integrate our solution more thoroughly and become long-term partners rather than just customers. It was a less explosive growth story than most startups pitched, steadier, more sustainable, but ultimately more valuable. It was also honest in a way that technology pitches often weren't, acknowledging the real-world friction that accompanied change in established industries. It's unorthodox, Michael admitted, but it feels right for who we actually are, not just who we want investors to think we are. The authenticity of that approach guided our preparation over the following weeks. We practiced our pitch relentlessly, refining the message until every team member could articulate not just their part, but the broader vision. I drilled everyone on potential investor questions, playing devil's advocate with the skepticism I'd developed over years of manufacturing experience. 2 weeks before our first scheduled investor meeting, disaster struck. Our largest pilot customer, a medical device manufacturer in Oregon, abruptly terminated their contract, citing budget constraints. The news hit like a body blow, not just removing our most impressive reference customer, but raising questions about our entire market approach. The leadership team gathered in the conference room, the mood somber. We can delay the funding pitch, Audrey suggested. Give ourselves time to replace the reference customer. We don't have time, Logan countered. Our runway won't stretch that far. Michael looked to me. Sarah, what's your take? You've been through rough patches before. Everyone turned, waiting for wisdom from the experienced executive. But in that moment, all my careful preparation felt hollow. The solid ground I thought I'd found at Vertex suddenly seemed as uncertain as the decision to leave Wilson in the first place. I need to think, I said, rising abruptly. Give me an hour. I walked the blocks surrounding our office building, Seattle's persistent drizzle matching my mood. The loss of our flagship customer wasn't just a business setback, it was a personal one. I'd rebuilt my professional identity around the belief that I could help this company succeed, that my manufacturing expertise combined with their technology vision would create something valuable. Now that vision was in jeopardy, and with it, my conviction that leaving Wilson had been the right choice. The doubts I'd been suppressing surfaced with crushing force. What if this was all a mistake? What if I'd thrown away a secure legacy for a venture that would implode before it even truly launched? My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Heard about Mediform pulling out. Not your fault. Remember why you're there. Why was I here? Not just at Vertex, but in Seattle, 3,000 miles from everything familiar. The easy answer was escape, from my father's disappointment, my brother's unearned advancement, the constraints of being perpetually undervalued. But as I walked, another truth emerged. I wasn't just running from something, I was running toward something. The freedom to build without predetermined limitations. The challenge of creating value that stood on its merits, not family connections. The opportunity to integrate everything I knew about manufacturing with everything I was learning about innovation. I found myself at the waterfront, watching ferries cross the Sound beneath heavy clouds. The vastness of the water reminded me of that first night on my apartment balcony. The sensation of possibilities extending to the horizon, unbounded by the neat lines of my previous life. An idea began to form, tenuous at first, then gaining clarity with each passing minute. By the time I returned to the office, it had solidified into a plan, The team still sat in the conference room, tossing around increasingly desperate alternatives. Michael looked up as I entered, hope and apprehension warring on his face. "I know what we need to do," I said, pulling up a chair. "We're pivoting our investor approach." "To what?" Logan asked warily. "To the truth. We lost our biggest pilot customer because our implementation was too ambitious for their risk tolerance. That's valuable information about how we need to approach traditional manufacturers." "You want to lead with our failure?" Audrey looked incredulous. "I want to lead with our learning," I corrected. "The strongest investor pitches don't hide setbacks. They show how the team adapts to them. We're going to demonstrate exactly how we're adjusting our strategy based on this experience." "That's unconventional," Michael said slowly. "So is our company. We're not a typical Silicon Valley play pretending manufacturing problems can be solved with pure technology. We're a hybrid, bringing tech solutions to an industry that moves deliberately and values reliability over disruption." I pulled up our pitch deck, deleting slides and creating new ones as I spoke. "We're going to acknowledge the setback, share our adjusted implementation timeline, and demonstrate how this makes our solution more viable for the mainstream market, not just early adopters." The team watched, skepticism gradually shifting to engagement as the new narrative took shape. We weren't promising overnight transformation anymore. We were offering a carefully choreographed evolution that respected the realities of factory floors and supply chains. "And the financial projections?" Michael asked. "This changes our growth curve significantly. They become more credible," I said confidently. "Slower initial growth, but more sustainable expansion as we build a reputation for successful implementations, rather than just flashy demos. The total value increases even if the hockey stick gets less steep." By the time we finished revising the strategy, it was past midnight. The new approach was riskier. Investors typically preferred bold claims of market dominance to measured promises of steady growth. But it was authentic to who we were as a company and to my own professional experience. As the team dispersed, Michael lingered. "That was impressive," he said quietly. "Most executives would have tried to hide the customer loss or minimize its significance. I spent years watching my father make decisions based on maintaining appearances rather than addressing reality," I replied. "It rarely ends well." "You're bringing a different perspective here, Sarah. It's changing how we think about ourselves." His words stayed with me as I walked to my apartment through the quiet streets. For years at Wilson, I'd tried to fit my insights into predetermined channels, accommodating existing power structures and legacy thinking. Here, my perspective wasn't just tolerated, but valued specifically because it challenged assumptions. The realization was both liberating and sobering. I was helping shape Vertex's identity just as it was reshaping mine. We were evolving together, and the outcome remained uncertain. The safety of Wilson Manufacturing, with its predictable hierarchy and established processes, seemed very far away. But so did the constraints that had kept me from fully expressing my capabilities. That night, standing once again on my small balcony overlooking the Sound, I finally admitted to myself that I didn't want to go back. Not to Wilson, not to Chicago, not to being Thomas Wilson's reliable daughter, rather than Sarah Wilson, financial strategist and bridge builder between industries. I was building something new here. Not just a career, but an identity based on what I chose to value rather than what had been chosen for me. The path ahead was foggy, full of potential wrong turns and hazards, but it was unmistakably mine. When our first investor meeting arrived the following week, I walked in without the crushing anxiety that had accompanied similar presentations at Wilson. There, I'd carried the weight of family legacy and my father's judgment. Here, I carried only my own convictions and the collective vision of our small team. "Manufacturing technology is a crowded space," the lead investor noted during our presentation. "What makes Vertex different enough to succeed where others have failed?" I met his gaze steadily. We respect the complexity of the problem. Many tech companies approach manufacturing with the assumption that software alone can transform entrenched processes. Our approach integrates technological innovation with practical implementation wisdom. And you've already had one major customer back out, another investor observed. Why should that give us confidence rather than concern? Because we learned from it, I replied without hesitation. We discovered that our initial implementation approach moved too quickly for traditional manufacturing risk tolerance. We've adjusted to a phased rollout that delivers value at each stage rather than requiring a leap of faith. The questions continued, probing our financial projections, competitive positioning, and go-to-market strategy. I found myself drawing not just on my prepared answers, but on decades of manufacturing experience, sometimes citing examples from Wilson that I'd been reluctant to reference before. When the meeting concluded, Michael and I walked to a nearby coffee shop to debrief. You mentioned Wilson Manufacturing several times, he observed. That's new. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. I've been trying to distance myself from my past, but there's valuable experience there that helps us tell our story more credibly. I'm starting to think I don't need to erase where I came from to build something new. Integration rather than rejection, he nodded. Seems appropriate for a company building bridges between traditional industry and new technology. The metaphor resonated deeply. I'd been treating my professional identity as an either-or proposition, either Wilson Manufacturing's heir apparent or Vertex's financial innovator. Perhaps it could be a both-and, the lessons of the past informing the possibilities of the future without constraining them. That evening, for the first time since arriving in Seattle, I called my father. Not to apologize, not to explain my departure again, but simply to check in. The conversation was stilted at first, neither of us quite knowing how to interact outside our established patterns. The factory floor expansion is behind schedule, he offered when pleasantries ran thin. The contractors say they need another month. Have you considered a phased approach? I suggested, drawing on a strategy we'd just developed at Vertex. Commission the completed sections while they finish the rest. It would let you start training operators sooner. A pause, then. That's not a bad idea. I'll talk to operations tomorrow. The exchange was small but significant. Professional respect without the weight of family expectations. A hint that perhaps, with enough distance, we might find a new way to relate that honored our shared industry knowledge without subsuming my identity into the Wilson legacy. As I hung up, I realized the call represented something else too, a growing confidence that I could engage with my past without being pulled back into its orbit. Seattle was becoming home. Vertex was becoming my professional identity, and the path forward, though still uncertain, was undeniably mine to chart. That night I finally unpacked the last of my boxes, hanging artwork and arranging books on shelves. No longer a temporary space, my apartment began to reflect the person I was becoming. A blend of Chicago precision and Seattle creativity, manufacturing experience and technological ambition, Wilson legacy and Vertex innovation. The leap of faith that had carried me across the country was transforming into something more grounded, a deliberate journey toward integration rather than escape, toward building rather than merely leaving behind. 3 months into my Seattle life, the city's persistent rain had become oddly comforting. The gentle patter against my apartment windows created a soothing backdrop for early morning coffee and late-night financial reviews. I'd developed new routines: Sunday farmers markets in Ballard, weekday runs along the waterfront, and coffee from the small shop downstairs where the barista now started my order when she saw me approaching. My body was changing too. The regular, running had toned muscles long neglected during Chicago's endless winter. My shoulders, once perpetually tense from carrying the weight of Wilson Manufacturing's expectations, had loosened. Even my clothes hung differently. The structured suits that had been my Chicago armor now felt constrictive and formal in Vertex's casual environment. The transformation wasn't just physical. My mind worked differently here, unfettered by the careful self-censoring that had become second nature at Wilson. Ideas flowed more freely, connections formed more naturally between disparate concepts. In meetings, I found myself speaking up without first calculating the political implications of each statement, a freedom that still occasionally startled me. Our investor pitch had succeeded beyond expectations. Not only had we secured the necessary Series B funding, but we'd attracted strategic investors with deep manufacturing connections. My unorthodox approach, honesty about our challenges and a realistic growth trajectory, had resonated with investors tired of impossible hockey stick projections. The Wilson Honesty Premium, Michael had dubbed it, only half joking. Turns out telling the truth is our secret weapon. The nickname could have stung, a reminder of the family legacy I was trying to redefine. Instead, I found myself embracing it. My Wilson heritage wasn't something to escape, but to transform, taking the values worth preserving while discarding the limitations. Our newly secured funding allowed us to accelerate product development and expand our implementation team. Each morning brought new faces to the office: engineers, account managers, UX specialists, all drawn to Vertex's vision of bringing manufacturing into the digital age. The energy was infectious, the possibilities expanding daily. One Tuesday morning, Logan appeared at my office door, tablet in hand. "Got a minute? I need a reality check on something." This had become our routine, the CTO seeking my manufacturing expertise before pursuing technical directions. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "What's up?" "I'm thinking about a new module for the platform," he said, sliding the tablet toward me. Real-time integration between production scheduling and raw material inventory. It could eliminate a major pain point for manufacturers, but the implementation complexity might be too high for most clients. The wireframes on the screen showed an elegant solution to a problem I'd wrestled with for years at Wilson. "This is brilliant," I acknowledged. "But you're right about the complexity. Most manufacturers still track raw materials in separate systems, often with manual reconciliation." "So it's too ambitious?" I considered the question, remembering countless frustrating afternoons trying to align production schedules with material availability. Not too ambitious, just too abrupt. What if we created a transitional approach? Start with automated data transfer between existing systems before pushing for full integration. Logan's face lit up. A bridge solution. That could work. Instead of forcing them to replace their inventory systems, we create connectors that improve their current process while preparing them for eventual full integration. Exactly. Give them immediate value while laying groundwork for the bigger transformation. He scribbled notes enthusiastically. "This is why you're essential. Here, Sarah, the engineering team would have built the perfect solution that nobody could actually implement." His words warmed me. At Wilson, my practical knowledge had often been dismissed as lack of vision. That's not how we've always done it, interpreted as resistance rather than wisdom. Here, that same knowledge was valued precisely because it tempered technological optimism with operational reality. As Logan left, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "In Seattle next week for a conference. Dinner Thursday? Dying to hear how startup life is treating you." I smiled, realizing I was genuinely excited to share my experiences. The last time we'd met, I'd been shell-shocked from my hasty departure from Wilson, uncertain whether I'd made the biggest mistake of my career. Now I had stories to tell, achievements to share, and a growing confidence in my decision. "Absolutely," I texted back. "So much to update you on." Later that afternoon, a company-wide email announced our first major client since the Mediform setback: Prentice Industrial, a mid-sized manufacturer of precision components with facilities across the Midwest. They'd signed on for a phased implementation of our core platform, starting with their flagship plant in Michigan. "This is partly your doing," Michael said when I stopped by his office to congratulate him. Your revised implementation strategy made them comfortable taking the leap. Our doing, I corrected. The whole team adapted when we needed to. He studied me for a moment. You've changed since you arrived, you know. You talk about we and our now, not just your individual contribution. The observation caught me off guard. At Wilson, I'd developed the habit of carefully documenting my personal contributions, ensuring there was no ambiguity about which successes could be attributed to me. It had been necessary in an environment where credit was currency in the ongoing competition for my father's approval. I guess I don't need to stake my claim here, I said slowly, realizing the truth as I spoke it. The value I bring is recognized without me having to constantly assert it. Exactly. Michael nodded. Which is why I want you to lead the Prentice implementation. You understand both sides of this equation better than anyone. The technology we're offering and the manufacturing realities they're navigating. The assignment was unexpected. CFOs typically didn't lead client implementations. Wouldn't Audrey's team normally handle this? Sales has the relationship management experience. Audrey's team will support you, he clarified. But Prentice specifically mentioned your manufacturing background as a factor in their decision. They want someone who speaks their language. The opportunity was both thrilling and terrifying. Success would cement my position at Vertex as more than just a financial steward. Failure would validate my lingering fears that I'd overestimated my adaptability to this new world. When do we start? I asked, pushing doubts aside. Kickoff meeting next Monday. You'll need to be on site in Michigan by Wednesday. Michigan. A mere 4-hour drive from Chicago and the Wilson manufacturing headquarters. The proximity stirred a complex mix of emotions: apprehension about being so close to my former life, curiosity about how the company was faring without me, and a twinge of homesickness for the city where I'd spent my entire career. I'll make it work, I assured Michael, already mentally reorganizing my schedule to accommodate this new responsibility. The Prentice preparation consumed my week. I assembled a cross-functional team: engineers to handle technical integration, UX specialists to design training materials, and account managers to maintain the client relationship after initial implementation. Each selection required balancing technical skills with the interpersonal awareness needed to navigate a traditional manufacturing environment. Thursday evening found me explaining these complexities to Lisa over dinner at a waterfront restaurant. The Seattle skyline sparkled across the water, the Space Needle illuminated against the night sky. So you're not just running their finances anymore? You're actually leading their flagship client implementation? Lisa shook her head in amazement. Talk about expanding your role. It's terrifying, I admitted, swirling my wine thoughtfully. But also incredibly energizing. I'm using parts of my brain that had almost atrophied at Wilson. Speaking of Wilson, Lisa hesitated. Have you heard anything from your family lately? The question didn't sting the way it once might have. Dad calls occasionally. Brief, slightly awkward conversations about weather and business generalities. Mark sent a text last month saying they'd finally hired a new financial analyst to take over some of my old responsibilities. 3 months after I left. No attempts to lure you back? I laughed. Dad's too proud for that. And honestly, I'm not sure I could go back now. I've tasted something different here. The freedom to contribute based on my capabilities rather than my position in the family hierarchy. Lisa studied me over her glass. You seem different, Sarah. More present. Less like you're constantly calculating your next move. That's exactly how it feels, I realized. At Wilson, I was always thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating political landmines, managing perceptions. Here, I can just focus on doing good work. It suits you, she said simply. Later that night, packing for the Michigan trip, I found myself reflexively reaching for the conservative suits that had been my Wilson uniform. I hesitated. then pushed them aside in favor of more versatile separates, still professional but less rigidly formal. A small change, but symbolic of the larger transformation underway. My phone chimed with an email from James. Heard Vertex. Landed Prentice Industrial. Congratulations, they were on our prospect list for next quarter. The message carried no hint of resentment, just professional acknowledgement from a former colleague. I appreciated his grace, maintaining our friendship despite the awkwardness of now working for competitors. Thanks, I replied. Different solution than Wilson would have offered, but they seemed ready for a technology leap. How are things there? His response came quickly. Stabilizing. Your dad hired a consultant to help Mark with the financial oversight. Between the three of us, the expansion is back on schedule. The news should have triggered jealousy or vindication. Instead, I felt a surprising sense of relief. Wilson Manufacturing had been my life for so long that its success remained important to me, even from a distance. The company employed hundreds of people whose livelihoods didn't deserve to be casualties of family drama. Glad to hear it, I wrote back sincerely. Heading to Michigan for the Prentice implementation next week. Any advice for working with Midwestern manufacturers? His response made me smile. Bring donuts to early meetings. The good kind, not the cheap box stuff. Manufacturing folks remember who respects their breakfast preferences. Sunday evening, I boarded a flight to Detroit with my carefully assembled implementation team. Sonia, our UX lead, had never visited a manufacturing facility before. Raj, our algorithm specialist, had only seen production lines in textbooks. 2 implementation specialists rounded out the group, Taylor, with experience in logistics software, and Amir specializing in integration architecture. As the plane lifted above Seattle's cloud cover, I found myself mentally preparing not just the technical aspects of our visit, but the cultural translation I would need to provide. These brilliant colleagues understood software development intimately, but lacked the context of factory operations, the noise, the pace, the practical constraints that shape decisions on the production floor. What exactly happens in a kickoff meeting? Sonia asked, leaning across the aisle. I've only ever done remote implementations for software clients. We'll tour their facility first, I explained. See the actual production processes we're trying to optimize. Then we'll meet with department heads to understand their current workflows before presenting our implementation plan. Will they understand our technical explanations? Raj worried. I tend to get detailed. I smiled reassuringly. That's why I'm there, to translate between your technical expertise and their operational realities. As we talked through the upcoming meetings, I realized how naturally I'd stepped into this bridging role. At Wilson, I'd often found myself translating between old-school production supervisors and technology vendors, a skill I'd taken for granted. Here, that same ability represented unique value, the capacity to connect Silicon Valley innovation with Rust Belt manufacturing. Monday morning found us in rental cars navigating the industrial outskirts of Lansing, Michigan. Prentice's manufacturing facility sprawled across several acres, a main production building flanked by warehouses and shipping docks. The familiar sights, sounds, and even smells of a busy factory floor awakened muscle memory from countless similar visits throughout my career. It's so loud, Sonia shouted over the machinery din as we toured the production area, wide-eyed behind required safety glasses. This is actually quieter than most, I called back. Their precision equipment runs smoother than heavy manufacturing. We followed our guide, Prentice's operations director Hector Martinez, through the carefully orchestrated chaos of the factory floor. Workers nodded respectfully as we passed, some eyeing our visitor badges with the wariness typical of employees who had endured too many improvement initiatives imposed by outsiders who didn't understand their daily realities. Currently, our biggest bottleneck is here, Hector explained, stopping beside a quality control station where components were being meticulously inspected. Parts can wait up to 8 hours for QC during peak production, creating ripple effects. Throughout the schedule, Raj studied the process intently. Your inventory management system doesn't prioritize QC based on downstream dependencies, Hector laughed. Our inventory management system is largely spreadsheets and tribal knowledge. That's why we need your solution. I watched understanding dawn across my team members' faces. The gap between technological possibility and current reality suddenly concrete rather than theoretical. This wasn't about implementing elegant code. It was about helping real people solve practical problems that affected their daily work. The conference room meeting that followed was equally illuminating. Department heads arrived with thick binders of reports and well-worn process documentation. Their questions were pointed, informed by years of operational experience and previous technology implementations that had promised transformation but delivered complication. Your system looks impressive in the demo, said the production manager, arms crossed defensively. But can it handle our custom workflows? We've tried off-the-shelf solutions before that required us to completely change how we operate. Before Raj could launch into a technical explanation, I intervened. That's precisely why we're here for a full week before writing a single line of integration code. We need to understand your workflows first, then adapt our system to enhance rather than disrupt them. The tension in the room eased slightly. These were my people, practical problem solvers suspicious of grand promises, but open to genuine partnerships. I found myself slipping effortlessly into their language, referencing manufacturing processes and constraints that resonated with their daily experience. By day's end, we'd established not just a technical framework, but the beginnings of trust. As we gathered in the hotel lobby to debrief, Sonia shook her head in amazement. You were speaking an entirely different language in there, she observed. I've never seen executives open up that quickly during an initial meeting. Sarah was one of them, Amir pointed out. You could tell they recognized it immediately. The simple observation carried profound meaning. For years at Wilson, I'd struggled to be seen as more than the boss's daughter. My manufacturing knowledge dismissed as something inherited rather than earned. Here, that same knowledge represented hard-won expertise that commanded immediate respect. Tomorrow's the real test, I reminded them. We need to translate their operational challenges into specific technical requirements without losing their confidence. Over the next 3 days, we immersed ourselves in Prentice's operations. I shadowed floor supervisors while Raj analyzed data flows and Sonia documented user interactions with existing systems. Each evening, we reconvened to synthesize our findings and adjust our implementation approach. By Thursday, we'd developed a phased plan that addressed Prentice's most pressing pain points first, while establishing architecture for more sophisticated features later. The proposal represented a perfect fusion of Vertex's technological capabilities and Prentice's operational realities, neither compromising innovation nor ignoring practical constraints. As I presented the final plan to Prentice's executive team, I felt a clarity and confidence that had often eluded me at Wilson. There, I'd always been conscious of representing the family business, measuring my words against my father's expectations. Here, I spoke solely from professional expertise and genuine conviction about the value we could deliver. What you're proposing isn't just a software implementation, Prentice's CEO observed after I finished. It's a transformation strategy that happens to include technology. That's exactly what we've been looking for. His words crystallized something I'd been feeling all week, that my value transcended specific skills or knowledge. I brought an integrated perspective that connected technological possibilities with operational realities, financial imperatives with human considerations. This wasn't just about applying what I'd learned at Wilson, it was about evolving those lessons into something new and more powerful. Friday evening, with the contract signed and implementation schedule approved, the team celebrated at a local brewery. Their excitement was infectious. High fives over technical solutions successfully explained, laughter about cultural misunderstandings, narrowly avoided, and genuine pride in the partnership we'd established. To Sarah, Sonia declared, raising her glass, who somehow speaks both manufacturing and technology fluently. As glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown local number. Saw your name in Prentice's visitor log. In town until tomorrow. Coffee? It was signed simply Mark, my brother, reaching out across the gulf that had opened between us when I left Wilson. The message sparked conflicting emotions, wariness about his motives, curiosity about Wilson's status, and a surprising flicker of willingness to reconnect outside our prescribed family roles. Everything okay? Raj asked, noticing my distraction. Family matter, I said, putting my phone away. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow. That night in my hotel room, I considered my options carefully. Meeting Mark meant potentially reopening wounds that had just begun to heal. Not meeting him meant continuing a separation that, regardless of its justification, carried its own cost. What finally decided me was the realization that I no longer feared the encounter. The Sarah who had fled Chicago 3 months earlier had been raw with betrayal, her sense of self intimately tied to her position at Wilson Manufacturing. The Sarah who had just successfully led a major client implementation for a technology startup approached the situation from a position of newfound strength. Airport Starbucks, 10 a.m., I texted back. I fly out at noon. The next morning I spotted Mark immediately, fidgeting with a coffee cup at a corner table. He looked simultaneously familiar and strange, the brother I'd known all my life now, occupying a role I'd once considered mine. He stood awkwardly as I approached, uncertainty evident in his posture. You look different, he blurted as I set down my luggage. Healthier or something. Seattle agrees with me, I replied, studying him in turn. New lines creased his forehead, and his normally immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. Slightly rumpled shirt, tie loosened at the collar. How's the financial director position working out? I asked directly, once I'd returned with my own coffee. He winced at the title. About as well as you'd expect. Dad hired a consultant to handle the technical aspects. I'm mostly the face of the department for client meetings. The admission held no satisfaction for me. Mark hadn't been the architect of my departure, merely its catalyst and beneficiary. And the expansion? Back on track, more or less. The investor relations have been the hardest part. He hesitated. They keep asking about you. I nodded, unsurprised. I'd built those relationships over 18 months of careful cultivation. What does Dad tell them? That you're pursuing other opportunities but remain supportive of Wilson's growth. Mark gave a humorless laugh. They know it's corporate speak, but what else can he say? I drove away our most competent executive because of outdated nepotism. The blunt assessment from my brother, the direct beneficiary of that nepotism, was unexpected. Why are you telling me this, Mark? What are you doing in Michigan? He shifted uncomfortably. Client visit. Prentice was on our prospect list before they signed with Vertex. A pause. With you. Business competition isn't personal, I said evenly. No, but family is. He met my eyes directly for the first time. I never thanked you for covering for me all those years, for picking up my slack, making excuses when I missed meetings, fixing my reports before Dad saw them. I took it for granted that you'd always be there to make me look better than I was. The acknowledgement caught me off guard. I'd never expected Mark to recognize the 1,000 small ways I'd protected him throughout our professional lives, shielding him from the full consequences of his lackadaisical approach. Why are you saying this now? Because I see it clearly now that you're gone. The department's a mess without you. Dad's stressed. I'm in over my head. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm not asking you to come back. I know that ship has sailed, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I lost when you left. Not just your competence, but your generosity, I guess. The words touched something I hadn't realized needed healing, not the professional wound of being passed over, but the personal hurt of having my sacrifices go unacknowledged. I needed to leave, I said. Finally. Not just because of the promotion, but because I couldn't grow there. Not fully. Mark nodded slowly. I can see that now. You seem bigger somehow. More yourself. I am, I realized, the truth of it settling deep in my bones. I'm doing work that challenges me in new ways, building something that matters, leading from my strengths rather than compensating for others' weaknesses. Dad won't admit it, but he sees it too. When Prentice signed with Vertex, he read everything he could find about your company. I caught him watching your promotion video on their website. The image of my father secretly tracking my new career brought a complicated mix of emotions: amusement, vindication, and a lingering yearning for his approval that I hadn't quite outgrown. Tell him I'm well, I said simply. Tell him Seattle suits me. As my flight lifted above Michigan's patchwork landscape later that day, I reflected on the strange symmetry of the week. I'd arrived to implement new technology in a traditional manufacturing environment, a bridge between worlds. I'd departed having begun to rebuild another kind of bridge, one connecting my past and present selves. The Sarah who had fled Chicago in hurt and anger was evolving into someone more integrated, a professional who could draw on hard-won manufacturing wisdom while embracing technological innovation, a daughter who could acknowledge family ties without being defined by them, a woman discovering that transformation didn't require abandoning her history, but rather recontextualizing it. Back in Seattle, I threw myself into expanding our success with Prentice into a repeatable implementation model. Each week brought new progress, refinements to our onboarding process, enhancements to our integration tools, improvements in how we translated between technological capabilities and operational needs. My dual perspective proved increasingly valuable as Vertex grew. When engineers proposed elegant solutions that overlooked manufacturing realities, I could gently redirect their thinking. When potential clients expressed skepticism about yet another technology promising transformation, I could speak authentically to their concerns from lived experience. 6 months after my departure from Wilson, Michael called me into his office for an unexpected conversation. The board has been discussing our growth trajectory, he began, unusually formal. Your manufacturing implementation strategy has proven more successful than our original direct-to-enterprise approach. We want to double down on it. I nodded, waiting for the specific proposal or challenge that typically followed such statements. We're creating a new position, Chief Transformation Officer, responsible for overseeing how our technology integrates with traditional manufacturing environments. It would be parallel to your CFO role initially, with the understanding that you'd eventually need to choose one track as we continue to scale. The opportunity represented exactly the kind of recognition I'd sought but never received at Wilson, advancement based on demonstrated value rather than prescribed paths or family connections. I'm interested, I said carefully, though managing dual roles even temporarily would be challenging. We'd adjust your CFO responsibilities, bring in a strong controller to handle day-to-day operations while you maintain strategic oversight. He leaned forward. Sarah, this role is a reflection of the unique perspective you've brought to Vertex. No one else here has your combination of manufacturing operations knowledge and financial strategic thinking. As I walked back to my office, the significance of the moment washed over me. 6 months ago, I'd been fighting for recognition in a company where my last name should have guaranteed it. Now, I was being offered a position created specifically to leverage my unique capabilities, in an organization where my family connections meant nothing. The transformation wasn't just in my job title or responsibilities. It was in how I perceived my own value. No longer relative to family expectations or legacy roles, but anchored in my distinctive combination of experiences, skills, and perspective. I had become someone new without abandoning who I had been, integrating my manufacturing heritage with technological innovation to create something neither world could achieve alone. That evening, I stood on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint Seattle's waterfront in gold and amber. The city no longer felt temporary or foreign, but increasingly like home, a place I had chosen rather than inherited, where I was building an identity based on contribution rather than connection. My phone chimed with a text from Lisa. Heard about the promotion offer. Chief Transformation Officer has a nice ring to it. Decision made? I smiled, typing back, still considering but leaning yes. The transformation goes both ways, changing manufacturing through technology and being changed in the process. Her response came quickly. That's the Sarah Wilson I always knew was there. Just needed the right environment to fully emerge. As night fell over the city, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. I had left Chicago believing I needed to escape my past to find my future. What I'd discovered instead was the power of integration, bringing my manufacturing wisdom into a technology environment, carrying family-taught values into an innovation space, bridging worlds that typically viewed each other with suspicion. The transformation wasn't complete. Such journeys never truly are. But standing between the lights of the city and the darkness of the water, I recognized that I was becoming exactly who I needed to be. Not defined by rejection of my past, nor limited by its constraints, but evolving into something that honored both heritage and possibility, legacy and innovation, roots and wings. Seattle's autumn painted the city in rich amber and crimson, a stark contrast to the steel-gray waters of Puget Sound. 1 year after my abrupt departure from Wilson Manufacturing, I stood at the podium of the Pacific Northwest Manufacturing Innovation Summit, preparing to deliver the keynote address. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd attended dozens of similar conferences as a Wilson representative, always in a supporting role, never as the featured speaker. Our next presenter is Sarah Wilson, Chief Transformation Officer at Vertex Innovations, the moderator announced. Previously a senior executive at Wilson Manufacturing, Sarah has pioneered a new approach to technology implementation in traditional manufacturing environments, resulting in Vertex's remarkable growth over the past year. As I took the stage, I scanned the audience of manufacturing executives, technology innovators, and industry analysts. The two worlds I now bridged, represented in a single room. My presentation, Digital Transformation Without Disruption, Evolution Not Revolution, encapsulated the philosophy I'd developed since joining Vertex, drawing on both my manufacturing heritage and newfound technological perspective. The greatest barrier to innovation in manufacturing isn't technological, it's cultural, I began. We've created a false dichotomy between tradition and innovation, stability and growth, proven processes and new possibilities. The truth is that the most successful transformations honor operational wisdom while embracing technological advancement. Speaking these words felt like a declaration of my personal journey, as much as a business philosophy. I'd found my professional voice not by rejecting my manufacturing background, but by reframing it as a strength in the technology space. The Sarah Wilson who commanded this stage was neither solely her father's daughter, nor a tech startup executive, but something more integrated and authentic than either identity alone could have been. After the presentation, a circle of attendees gathered around me, business cards extended, questions flowing. Among them was Eleanor Chen, CEO of Meridian Partners, one of the largest manufacturing investment groups in the country. Impressive. Perspective, she said, studying me with shrewd eyes. Most tech executives dismiss manufacturing concerns as resistance to change rather than legitimate operational wisdom. Most tech executives haven't spent 20 years on factory floors, I replied with a smile. The practical constraints are real, not just psychological barriers. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Precisely why I'd like to continue this conversation. My firm is considering a specialized fund focused on manufacturing technology integration. We need advisors who truly understand both sides of the equation. Her business card joined 24 others in my conference folder. Tangible evidence of the professional network I was building independently of Wilson connections or Vertex affiliations. This was my own community, formed through shared vision, rather than family ties or corporate hierarchy. Back at my hotel that evening, I found Michael and Logan waiting in the lobby bar, champagne already ordered. "To our star speaker," Michael declared, raising his glass. "The conference organizer told me they've never had such engagement for a keynote. 3 manufacturing CEOs specifically asked for intro meetings with us. The right message at the right time," I demurred, though privately I felt a surge of pride. Finding my voice in this new context had been a gradual process, shedding the careful political calculations that had constrained my communication at Wilson while retaining the manufacturing fluency that gave my technological perspective credibility. "It's more than that," Logan insisted. "You've become the face of a third path, neither old-school manufacturing nor bleeding-edge tech disruption, but thoughtful integration of both strengths." His observation resonated with my own sense of evolution. When I'd first joined Vertex, I'd positioned myself in opposition to Wilson's traditionalism. Over time, that reactive stance had matured into something more nuanced. Appreciation for manufacturing wisdom coupled with enthusiasm for technological possibilities. "Speaking of integration," Michael said, setting down his glass, "the board approved our expansion plans this morning. We're opening an office in Chicago." The news caught me off guard. Chicago? That's unexpected. Our client base has been primarily West Coast and Texas. "Midwest manufacturing represents our largest growth opportunity," Michael explained, "and having a presence in that ecosystem would accelerate our penetration strategy." Logan grinned. "Also, your whole evolution not revolution approach works better when we're physically present in traditional manufacturing hubs, not just parachuting in from tech centers." The logic was sound, but the prospect of establishing a Vertex presence in my former hometown stirred complicated emotions. Chicago meant proximity to Wilson Manufacturing, to my father's scrutiny, to the professional community where I'd once been defined primarily by my family connection. "We'd like you to oversee the office launch," Michael continued, watching my reaction carefully. "Split your time between Seattle and Chicago for the first 6 months, then decide which base makes more sense for your role long-term." "That's a significant commitment," I said carefully. "When would this start?" "January. We've already identified potential office space in the West Loop. Close enough to the manufacturing corridor for credibility, downtown enough for recruitment appeal." The proposal demanded serious consideration. Returning to Chicago as Vertex's representative would mean engaging with my former professional community from an entirely different position, not as Thomas Wilson's daughter, but as a technology executive, in my own right. The prospect was both intimidating and intriguing. "Let me think about it," I requested. "It's not a simple decision." Later that night, alone in my hotel room, I found myself drawn to the window overlooking Seattle's twinkling skyline. This city had become home in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just a refuge from Chicago, but a place where I'd discovered new aspects of myself, built meaningful connections, and established professional credibility independent of my family name. The thought of dividing my time between Seattle and Chicago raised practical questions, but also deeper ones about identity and belonging. Was I ready to re-enter the professional ecosystem I'd fled a year earlier? Could I maintain the authentic voice I'd developed at Vertex when back in proximity to Wilson Manufacturing? My ringing phone interrupted these reflections. Lisa calling from San Francisco. "I hear Vertex is Chicago-bound," she said without preamble. "Michael's asking you to lead it, isn't he?" News traveled fast in venture capital circles. "You have spies everywhere," I laughed. "Yes, he's proposed it," I'm still processing. It's the obvious choice, Lisa observed. You understand the Midwest manufacturing mindset better than anyone else at Vertex. Plus, you have connections throughout the industry. That's part of what I'm considering, I admitted. Those connections still see me as a Wilson first and foremost. I've built something different here in Seattle. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's exactly why you're the right person. You've proven you can establish a new identity without rejecting your past. Now you can bring that integrated perspective back to where it might make the most difference. Her framing shifted. Something in my perception. Perhaps this wasn't about risking the identity I'd built in Seattle, but about expanding it, bringing my evolved perspective into the very environment where I'd once felt constrained. There's something else to consider, Lisa added. Eleanor Chen is assembling an advisory board for her manufacturing technology fund. She specifically mentioned wanting you involved after your keynote today. The connection wasn't immediately obvious. How does that relate to Chicago? Meridian Partners' main office is in Chicago, Lisa explained. They've backed half the major manufacturing operations in the Midwest. Being geographically proximate would make participation much more feasible. The opportunity to advise Meridian's fund represented something I hadn't fully anticipated, influence beyond Vertex itself, helping shape investment in the manufacturing technology sector broadly. It was a platform that could amplify the integration philosophy I'd been developing. I need to sleep on all this, I told Lisa. It's a lot to process. Of course. Just remember, going back doesn't mean regressing. The Sarah Wilson who would return to Chicago isn't the same one who left. Her words stayed with me as I drifted to sleep, prompting dreams of bridges spanning familiar waters, connecting separate shores that had once seemed impossibly distant. The following morning, over breakfast with Michael and the Vertex leadership team, I announced my decision. I'll lead the Chicago office launch with one condition. I want to build a genuine innovation hub, not just a satellite sales office, a place where Midwestern manufacturers can experience our technology in their context, with their constraints. Michael's face lit up. Exactly what I was hoping you'd say. We need to be embedded in that ecosystem, not just selling to it. It's also important that we establish a distinct Vertex identity there, I continued. Not defined in opposition to traditional manufacturers, but not subsumed by their conservatism either. The team nodded in agreement, and conversation quickly turned to practical matters. Timeline, staffing, logistics. But beneath these operational details lay a more profound shift. I was choosing to return to the environment I'd fled, not from necessity or defeat, but from confidence in my transformed perspective and the value it could bring. That afternoon, I called Eleanor Chen to discuss her advisory board invitation, which I accepted with the caveat of my upcoming geographic division between Seattle and Chicago. Far from being a limitation, she saw it as an advantage. Physical presence in both innovation and traditional manufacturing centers. That bifocal perspective is precisely what we need, she confirmed. Too many advisors are firmly camped in either the technology or manufacturing worldview. We need bridge builders who respect both. Bridge builder. The term captured something essential about my emerging professional identity, not defined by rejection of either world, but by the capacity to connect them purposefully. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation, both for the Chicago office launch and my evolving role within it. I assembled a core team that reflected the integration philosophy, including technology specialists with manufacturing backgrounds and operations experts eager to embrace innovation. Each hire represented a careful balance between technical capability and cultural translation skills. Parallel to these Vertex responsibilities, I began participating in preliminary discussions for Meridian's Manufacturing Technology Fund. Eleanor had assembled an impressive advisory group: venture capitalists, manufacturing executives, technology innovators, and policy experts, all focused on accelerating thoughtful digital transformation in traditional industries. My dual involvement with Vertex and Meridian created a virtuous cycle. Insights from fund discussions informed our Chicago strategy, while our implementation experiences provided concrete examples for investment considerations. I found myself increasingly at the center of a growing community focused on bridging technological innovation and manufacturing wisdom. December brought my first trip back to Chicago since my abrupt departure. The familiar skyline stirred a complex mix of emotions as my plane descended. Fondness for the city that had shaped me, apprehension about professional encounters with former colleagues, curiosity about how Wilson Manufacturing had evolved in my absence. The West Loop office space Michael had identified was perfect, a renovated industrial building with exposed brick and timber, historic character married to modern infrastructure. Standing in the empty space, I could envision what it would become, not just Vertex's Midwestern headquarters, but a genuine innovation hub where manufacturing leaders could engage with technological possibilities in a context that respected their operational realities. The architects can have preliminary designs ready by next week, the real estate agent was saying, but my attention had drifted to the window overlooking the city. From this vantage point, I could almost see Wilson Manufacturing's headquarters. On the north side, the building where I'd spent most of my professional life, navigating family expectations while trying to carve out my own contribution. "It's a good space," I confirmed. "Let's move forward with the lease." That evening, I met Lisa for dinner at a favorite restaurant near my former condo. She'd flown in specifically to support my re-entry into Chicago's business community, a gesture that typified her friendship throughout this transformation journey. "How does it feel to be back?" she asked as we settled into our table. "Surreal," I admitted. "Like visiting a place you've only seen in dreams, familiar but somehow altered." "Or perhaps you're the one who's altered," she suggested, "seeing the same city through different eyes." Her observation resonated deeply. The Chicago sprawling beyond our restaurant window was unchanged, but my perspective had shifted fundamentally. I no longer viewed the city's business landscape through the lens of Wilson Manufacturing's interests or my place within the family hierarchy. "I ran into James this morning," I mentioned, recalling the chance encounter at a coffee shop near the new office space. "He's been promoted to operations director at Wilson. Apparently, they've restructured substantially since I left." "Did he mention your father or brother?" "Briefly. Dad's supposedly exploring semi-retirement, grooming Mark for a more focused role rather than the all-encompassing financial directorship." I smiled ruefully. Lessons learned, perhaps, though never explicitly acknowledged. "And how did it feel, hearing about these changes?" I considered the question carefully. "Less emotionally charged than I would have expected. I'm genuinely glad they're finding more sustainable arrangements, but it feels like news about a former colleague's company rather than my own family drama." Lisa nodded approvingly. "That's significant progress. The old Sarah would have analyzed every detail for validation or vindication." She was right. A year earlier, updates about Wilson Manufacturing had triggered intense emotional responses. Satisfaction when they struggled without me, hurt when they succeeded despite my absence. That emotional entanglement had diminished gradually as I built my own identity at Vertex and within the broader manufacturing technology community. "I'm considering having dinner with my father while I'm in town," I admitted. "Not a reconciliation exactly, but perhaps a reset of sorts." "That's brave," Lisa observed. "What prompted the thought?" I gestured to the restaurant around us. Being back in Chicago, I realize there are parts of my history here worth reclaiming rather than rejecting. My relationship with my father is complicated, but it's still part of who I am. And who you are now is strong enough to engage with that complexity, without being diminished by it, Lisa concluded, raising her glass. "To evolution, not revolution, in business and in life." The following days brought a whirlwind of activity, finalizing the office lease, interviewing local candidates for the Chicago team, meeting with potential manufacturing clients curious about Vertex's Midwestern expansion. I navigated this terrain with growing confidence, neither hiding my Wilson background nor allowing it to define me. Eleanor Chen's introduction opened doors throughout Chicago's manufacturing ecosystem, under the auspices of Meridian Partners. Developing fund, I met with factory owners, production directors, and operations specialists across the region, listening to their digital transformation challenges and sharing insights from Vertex's successful implementations elsewhere. These conversations revealed a consistent pattern. Midwestern manufacturers recognized the necessity of technological evolution, but resisted approaches that dismissed their operational expertise or demanded wholesale replacement of functional systems. They sought partners who understood their practical constraints and valued their shop floor wisdom. That's exactly why we're establishing a presence here, I explained during a roundtable discussion with manufacturing executives. Not to impose Silicon Valley solutions on Midwest operations, but to develop integrated approaches that respect manufacturing realities while leveraging technological possibilities. The message resonated deeply, attracting interest not just in Vertex's offerings, but in the broader philosophy our Chicago office would embody. Several executives requested involvement in our innovation hub once established, offering to provide real-world testing environments and operational insights in exchange for early access to emerging solutions. By my third week in Chicago, a genuine community was forming around the not-yet-opened Vertex office. Manufacturers eager for thoughtful digital transformation, technology specialists with manufacturing backgrounds, investors interested in supporting integrated approaches, even academic partners from local engineering programs. This emerging ecosystem felt fundamentally different from both the hierarchical structure of Wilson Manufacturing and the innovation at all costs ethos of pure technology firms. It was a community built on mutual respect between disciplines often positioned as adversaries, united by recognition that meaningful transformation required both operational wisdom and technological advancement. Midway through December, I finally arranged dinner with my father. We met at a steakhouse downtown, neutral territory that held no particular family associations. Thomas Wilson arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed as always, though I noticed new lines around his eyes and additional gray at his temples. "You look well," he said after an awkward moment of greeting. "Seattle must agree with you." "It does," I confirmed as we were seated. "Though I'll be spending substantial time in Chicago going forward. Vertex is opening an office here in January." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Expanding already? That's impressive growth." The conversation proceeded cautiously at first, focused on safe topics: Chicago weather, mutual acquaintances, general industry trends. Gradually, as appetizers gave way to entrees, we ventured into more personal territory. "James tells me you've been structuring Vertex's Chicago office as an innovation hub," my father mentioned. "Not just a sales outpost." I nodded, pleased that he'd made the effort to learn about my current work. Traditional manufacturers need spaces where they can engage with technology on their terms without feeling their operational expertise is being dismissed. "A bridge between worlds," he observed, echoing terminology I'd used in public presentations. Exactly. Most technology firms approach manufacturing with a replacement mindset rather than an enhancement perspective. We're trying something different. My father was quiet for a moment, studying his glass. That approach might have benefited Wilson Manufacturing years ago. We've been playing catch-up on digital transformation, implementing changes too abruptly because we delayed too long. The admission, perhaps the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging a strategic misstep, caught me off guard. Integration is challenging regardless of timing, I offered, balancing operational stability with necessary evolution. Something you seem to have mastered personally as well as professionally. His gaze met mine directly. Mark speaks highly of your new role, says you found your voice at Vertex in ways you couldn't at Wilson. The reference to my brother surprised me. You and Mark discuss my career? A faint smile touched his lips. More than you might imagine. Your departure prompted reflections within the family about opportunities provided versus opportunities earned. Though not quite an apology, his words acknowledged the fundamental issue that had driven me from Wilson Manufacturing. Recognition that my contributions had been consistently undervalued, while my brother's position had been artificially elevated. We're making our own changes at Wilson, he continued. Mark has stepped back from financial oversight to focus on client development, where his natural abilities lie. We've restructured the executive team with more emphasis on demonstrated capability rather than historical patterns. The phrasing was careful, avoiding direct reference to the nepotism that had shaped the company's leadership for generations. Yet the implied acknowledgement represented significant evolution for a man who had never before questioned the family-first philosophy that had guided his career. That sounds like positive progress, I said simply. It's overdue, he admitted, though I regret that your departure was the catalyst required to prompt these changes. As dinner concluded and we prepared to part ways, my father hesitated uncharacteristically. Your Chicago office, would there be value in exploring potential collaborations between Vertex and Wilson Manufacturing? Not immediately, perhaps, but eventually? The question represented a remarkable shift. Thomas Wilson exploring partnership with the company his daughter had helped build, rather than expecting her return to the family business. More significantly, it acknowledged Vertex as a legitimate enterprise worthy of Wilson Manufacturing's consideration, not merely his daughter's temporary rebellion. I think there could be, I replied carefully. Once both organizations are ready, Vertex is still establishing its Midwestern presence, and Wilson sounds like it's in the midst of its own transformation. He nodded, accepting the measured response. Well, you know where to find us when the timing seems right. We parted with a brief embrace, awkward but genuine, neither fully reconciled nor irrevocably estranged. Like the professional worlds I was working to integrate, our relationship existed in an evolving middle ground, honoring history while creating space for new possibilities. The following morning, I met with the architectural team designing Vertex's Chicago office. Their initial concepts captured the integration philosophy beautifully, industrial elements preserved and highlighted while incorporating state-of-the-art technology infrastructure, manufacturing heritage visibly respected alongside innovation. Capacity. We've designated this central area as the collaboration hub, the lead architect explained, pointing to a large open space. Manufacturing clients and technology specialists working together rather than in separate domains. The physical manifestation of bridge building, literal space where distinct professional communities could engage productively rather than adversarially. As I reviewed the designs, suggesting refinements that would resonate with Midwestern manufacturing sensibilities, I recognized how fully this Chicago office would embody the integrated identity I'd been developing. Later that afternoon, Eleanor Chen called with unexpected news. The Meridian Board has accelerated our Manufacturing Technology Fund launch. We're announcing in February rather than June, with an initial commitment of $150 million. That's substantial, I observed, calculating the potential impact. What prompted the acceleration? Our preliminary conversations with Midwestern manufacturers revealed more readiness than we anticipated, she explained. Your roundtable discussions uncovered latent demand for thoughtful digital transformation approaches. The market is primed for exactly the integrated philosophy you've been advocating. The validation was deeply satisfying. Confirmation that the perspective I'd been developing resonated beyond Vertex itself, potentially influencing investment patterns throughout the manufacturing technology sector. We'd like you to speak at the launch event, Eleanor continued. Your manufacturing background combined with your technology leadership position makes you the ideal voice to articulate our investment approach. The invitation represented another expansion of my professional community, from Vertex leadership to Meridian Advisory to public advocate for a transformation philosophy that honored both manufacturing wisdom and technological possibilities. As December drew to a close, I found myself increasingly embedded in an emerging ecosystem spanning Chicago and Seattle, traditional manufacturing and technological innovation, operational expertise and digital transformation. My calendar filled with connections that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Breakfast with Midwestern factory owners, lunch with technology investors, dinner with academic partners developing new manufacturing engineering curricula. This wasn't just a professional network, but a genuine community united by shared vision rather than industry boundaries or corporate affiliations. Unlike the hierarchy at Wilson Manufacturing, or even the more egalitarian structure at Vertex, this ecosystem operated on principles of mutual respect and complementary expertise, recognizing that meaningful transformation required multiple perspectives. New Year's Eve found me back in Seattle, hosting a small gathering at my apartment overlooking the Sound. Michael and his partner joined several Vertex colleagues and local friends I'd made over the past year. As midnight approached, conversation turned to resolutions and expectations for the coming year. To Sarah's bi-coastal adventure, Michael proposed, raising his glass. May the Chicago office become the bridge we envision. And to communities that transcend geography, I added, thinking of the connections forming between Seattle innovation and Midwestern manufacturing, between technological possibility and operational wisdom, to integration rather than opposition. As fireworks illuminated the Space Needle and champagne flowed, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. I had left Chicago believing I needed to escape my past to find my future. What I'd discovered instead was the power of integration, creating something new that honored valuable aspects of what came before while embracing possibilities that pointed forward. The community forming around this integrated vision wasn't defined by family ties like Wilson Manufacturing or even corporate identity like Vertex Innovations. It was a community of purpose, people committed to thoughtful transformation across traditional boundaries, united by shared belief that genuine progress required bridge building rather than barrier reinforcement. Standing on my balcony as the new year began, Seattle's lights reflecting on the dark water below, I realized I had found my place, not in a single location or organization, but in the spaces between established domains, the connections that transformed separate worlds into an integrated whole greater than its parts. The grand opening of Vertex's Chicago Innovation Hub was scheduled for an unseasonably warm April morning. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline, while the interior seamlessly blended industrial heritage with technological advancement. Exposed brick walls housing state-of-the-art digital displays, original timber beams above prototype, manufacturing stations. The space embodied our integration philosophy in physical form. I'd been dividing my time between Seattle and Chicago for 3 months, watching this vision materialize from architectural renderings to functioning reality. Our core team of 20 had been carefully selected to balance manufacturing expertise with technological innovation, former production managers now specializing in digital transformation, software engineers with factory floor experience, implementation specialists fluent in both languages. Final walkthrough in 15 minutes, my assistant reminded me as I surveyed the main collaboration area where tomorrow's opening would take place. Nearly 200 guests had confirmed attendance, manufacturing executives, technology investors, academic partners, and industry analysts all curious about Vertex's distinctive approach to digital transformation. Among the confirmed attendees was a name that had given me pause when it appeared on the RSVP list, Thomas Wilson. My father had accepted the invitation without commentary, simply checking "will attend" on the digital response form. Our dinner, in December, had eased some tension, But his presence at this milestone event raised the stakes considerably. The walkthrough proceeded smoothly, our team confidently demonstrating the interactive exhibits designed to showcase Vertex's manufacturing, technology, and accessible practical contexts. The space functioned exactly as intended, a bridge between worlds typically separated by cultural and communication barriers. "We've confirmed all the technical presentations," Michael reported as we completed the final preparations. He'd flown in from Seattle for the opening, along with several board members eager to witness Vertex's Midwestern expansion. The manufacturing simulation is particularly impressive. Seeing our algorithms optimize a production line in real time really drives home the practical impact. "The key is that we're not just demonstrating technology," I emphasized. "We're showing how it integrates with existing manufacturing processes, rather than replacing them wholesale." Michael nodded appreciatively. "This hub embodies everything you've been advocating, technological advancement that honors operational expertise rather than dismissing it." As the team dispersed to handle final details, Eleanor Chen joined me by the windows overlooking the Yako city. Meridian Partners had officially launched their manufacturing technology fund the previous month, with my keynote speech helping articulate their investment philosophy. The fund had already attracted significant attention from both traditional manufacturers seeking transformation and technology developers targeting industrial applications. "Tomorrow represents a significant milestone," Eleanor observed. "Not just for Vertex, but for the integration approach you've championed. The industry is watching closely." "No pressure," I laughed, though her words underscored the stakes. This wasn't merely a company expansion, but a public demonstration of a philosophy I'd become increasingly identified with. The belief that meaningful transformation required bridges between technological innovation and manufacturing wisdom rather than victory of one over the other. "By the way," Eleanor added, "Wilson Manufacturing submitted an preliminary application to the Meridian Fund yesterday. They're developing an integrated production management system that combines their operational expertise with newer digital tracking capabilities." The information caught me off guard. My father hadn't mentioned any fund application during our occasional communications. That's unexpected. Their technology infrastructure was relatively traditional when I left. "The proposal cites recent restructuring and strategic redirection," Eleanor explained. "Apparently, they've been quietly modernizing their approach over the past year." The revelation stirred complicated emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that Wilson Manufacturing was embracing digital transformation more seriously, perhaps partly influenced by my departure and subsequent work. Yet another part wondered if the timing of their application, coinciding with Vertex's Chicago launch, represented something more deliberate. That evening, after the team's preparatory dinner, I returned to the quiet hub for a final review. The space held an anticipatory energy, like a stage set for tomorrow's performance, each element carefully positioned to demonstrate our integration philosophy. As I checked connections on one of the interactive displays, the front door chimed, unexpectedly. Turning, I was startled to find my brother Mark standing in the entrance, gazing around with undisguised curiosity. "Impressive," he said by way of greeting. "Very different from Wilson's corporate aesthetic." "What are you doing here, Mark?" I hadn't seen my brother since our Michigan conversation months earlier, though we'd exchanged occasional messages. "Advance reconnaissance," he admitted with a hint of his old charm. "Dad's coming tomorrow, and I thought it might be wise to prepare him for what to expect. This is quite a departure from his concept of a proper business environment." I gestured. "Around the hub." "That's rather the point. We're creating a space where innovation and tradition can engage productively rather than adversarially." Mark wandered further into the space, studying the manufacturing simulation station with genuine interest. "I hear you've been consulting with Meridian's investment fund as well, building quite the portfolio beyond Vertex itself." "Word travels fast," I observed, wondering about his purpose in mentioning Meridian. Chicago's manufacturing community isn't that large, he shrugged, especially when significant new investment enters the ecosystem. I decided to address the obvious question directly. Did you know Wilson Manufacturing applied to the Meridian Fund? A flicker of surprise crossed his features. Actually, no. That would have been Dad's decision, though it makes sense given the direction we've been moving. Which is? Mark hesitated, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Let's call it a necessary evolution. After you left, certain realities became impossible to ignore. Our technology infrastructure was outdated. Our approach to digital integration piecemeal at best. The expansion plans you'd developed before leaving highlighted gaps we weren't equipped to address. His candor was unexpected. The Mark I'd known at Wilson would have glossed over such vulnerabilities with easy charm rather than acknowledging them directly. Dad brought in a digital transformation consultant, he continued. Someone with manufacturing background but technology vision. She pointed out many of the same issues you'd raised over the years, but as an external voice without family dynamics complicating the message. The information filled in gaps in my understanding of Wilson's evolution since my departure. And your role in all this? I stepped back from financial oversight, a position I should never have accepted, he acknowledged ruefully. I'm focusing on client development and relationship management where I actually add value. We reorganized the executive structure completely, promoting based on demonstrated capability rather than, he paused, traditional patterns. His diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the fundamental shift he was describing. Wilson Manufacturing moving away from the family-first promotion philosophy that had shaped its leadership for generations. And Dad's comfortable with these changes? I asked skeptically, finding it difficult to imagine Thomas Wilson relinquishing long-held practices. Comfortable might be overstating it, Mark admitted, but he recognizes they're necessary for Wilson's survival. Your departure was a wake-up call, Sarah. Not just because of your financial expertise, but because it demonstrated that even the most loyal family members would eventually reject an unsustainable system. His unexpected insight rendered me momentarily speechless. I'd never considered my departure as potentially beneficial to Wilson Manufacturing, a catalyst for overdue changes rather than merely a personal escape. I should go, Mark said, glancing at his watch. I just wanted to see the space before tomorrow's event, to be prepared. He hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, what you've built here is impressive, genuinely innovative rather than merely disruptive. After he left, I sat alone in the hub's central area, processing the conversation. Wilson Manufacturing's evolution following my departure suggested something I hadn't fully considered, that my exit had created necessary space for changes that might not have occurred had I stayed and continued accommodating dysfunctional patterns. The realization shifted my perspective on tomorrow's event. I'd been anticipating my father's attendance as a test of my new identity, a measure of whether I could engage with my past without being diminished by it. Now I wondered if his presence might represent something more complex, recognition that our separate journeys had perhaps led to complementary destinations. Morning arrived with perfect spring weather, sunlight streaming through the hub's windows as staff made final preparations. By 9 o'clock, guests began arriving, manufacturing executives curious about technological possibilities, technology specialists interested in industrial applications, investors seeking promising integration approaches. I circulated through the growing crowd, making introductions and explaining the hub's purpose. The response was encouraging, genuine engagement with our philosophy rather than merely polite interest. Manufacturers who typically approach technology discussions with defensive skepticism were actively exploring the interactive exhibits, while technology specialists listened attentively to operational concerns they might previously have dismissed. Midway through the morning, I spotted my father entering with several Wilson Manufacturing executives. Thomas Wilson moved through the space with contained curiosity, his expression giving little away as he observed demonstrations and studied display panels. When our paths finally crossed near the central presentation area, the moment carried a weight beyond mere social greeting. "Impressive facility," he acknowledged, gesturing to the hub around us. "Very different from traditional corporate environments, but purposeful rather than merely fashionable." Coming from him, this represented high praise. "That was the goal," I replied. "Form following function, creating space where manufacturing wisdom and technological innovation can engage productively." His gaze met mine directly. "You've always understood that manufacturing experience carries valuable perspective that pure technologists often miss. I see that philosophy embodied throughout this operation." The observation seemed to reference not just Vertex's approach, but my own professional journey, finding ways to honor manufacturing wisdom while embracing technological possibilities, rather than allowing either perspective to dominate. "I understand Wilson Manufacturing has been undergoing its own evolution," I said carefully. "Mark mentioned significant restructuring." My father nodded, a hint of rueful acknowledgement crossing his features. "Necessary adaptations that perhaps should have occurred sooner. Some patterns become so familiar they're difficult to recognize as limitations rather than traditions." Coming from Thomas Wilson, who had built his career on maintaining established patterns, this represented remarkable self-reflection. Before I could respond, Michael arrived to introduce himself, and conversation shifted to more general business topics. The formal presentation began at 11, with Michael welcoming guests before introducing me as the driving force behind Vertex's integrated approach to manufacturing technology. Standing at the podium overlooking the assembled crowd, I felt a momentary sense of symmetry. Exactly 1 year earlier, I had left Wilson Manufacturing believing I needed to escape my past to find my future. Traditional manufacturing and technological innovation are often positioned as opposing forces, I began, scanning faces that represented both worlds. Stability versus disruption, proven processes versus new possibilities, operational wisdom versus digital transformation. This false dichotomy has cost both sides dearly. Manufacturers missing opportunities for necessary evolution. Technology firms developing elegant solutions divorced from operational realities. Throughout the audience, heads nodded in recognition. I continued, "The future belongs not to either perspective in isolation, but to thoughtful integration. Approaches that honor manufacturing expertise while embracing technological advancement, that build bridges rather than emphasize barriers." My gaze briefly met my father's as I spoke these words. His expression remained controlled, but I detected a flicker of something that might have been acknowledgement. Recognition that the philosophy I was articulating applied not just to business transformation but to our personal journeys as well as. The presentation concluded with demonstration of Vertex's latest manufacturing optimization platform, showcasing how our technology adapted to existing production processes rather than requiring wholesale replacement. The response was overwhelmingly positive, manufacturing executives appreciating the respect for operational realities, technology specialists recognizing the practical pathway to implementation, investors noting the sustainable growth potential of this integrated approach. As formal proceedings transitioned to networking lunch, Eleanor Chen approached with unexpected news. "The Meridian Investment Committee reviewed Wilson Manufacturing's preliminary application this morning," she informed me quietly. "They're interested in supporting the production management system, but have concerns about implementation capacity." I nodded, unsurprised. Wilson's historical weakness had been bridging technological development with shop floor adoption. Exactly. The integration challenge Vertex had built its reputation addressing. "They've requested a meeting to discuss potential partnership approaches," Eleanor continued, "including possible collaboration with technology firms that have demonstrated successful manufacturing implementation." The implication was clear. Meridian was suggesting Wilson Manufacturing and Vertex Innovations consider some form of partnership, leveraging complementary strengths to address mutual opportunities. That would be complicated, I observed, understatement masking the cascade of considerations such collaboration would entail. Eleanor smiled knowingly. The most valuable integrations often are. I'll arrange an exploratory discussion if you're open to it. Before I could formulate a response, my father approached, having evidently concluded another conversation nearby. Ms. Chen, he acknowledged with professional courtesy. I understand Meridian has reviewed our preliminary application. We have, Eleanor confirmed. With interest, though some implementation questions we believe could be addressed through strategic partnership. Thomas Wilson's gaze shifted briefly to me before returning to Eleanor. Partnership has proven valuable in addressing capability gaps. We've become more open to such approaches recently. The careful phrasing suggested evolution beyond Wilson Manufacturing's historical self-sufficiency, another indication of fundamental shifts following my departure. My father turned to me directly. Perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration, scenarios informally. There may be complementary strengths worth exploring. The invitation represented far more than a business proposition. It acknowledged Vertex, and by extension my new professional identity, as a legitimate enterprise worthy of Wilson Manufacturing's consideration, rather than merely a temporary rebellion to be waited out. More significantly, it suggested my father was prepared to engage with me as a professional peer rather than a subordinate family member. I think that would be constructive, I replied, matching his measured tone, while recognizing the significance beneath it. There may indeed be complementary approaches worth exploring. As Eleanor excused herself to greet other guests, my father lingered momentarily. Sarah, he said, his voice quieter than before, what you've built here is impressive. Not just the facility or even Vertex itself, but the philosophy it embodies. Integration rather than opposition. Evolution rather than rejection. The acknowledgement touched something deep. Not the daughter still seeking paternal approval, but the professional who recognized the value of meaningful recognition from a respected industry figure. Thank you, I said simply. That means a great deal coming from you. A ghost of a smile touched his features. Perhaps we've both learned something this past year about honoring foundations while building new structures. As he moved away to rejoin his colleagues, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me since leaving Wilson Manufacturing. Not reconciliation exactly. Too much had transpired for simple restoration of previous patterns, but transformation of something broken into something whole, if fundamentally changed. The remainder of the opening event unfolded successfully, with demonstrations, discussions, and connections forming throughout the afternoon. By the time the last guests departed, Vertex's Chicago Innovation Hub had clearly established itself as a significant new presence in the Midwestern manufacturing ecosystem. Not merely a technology company's satellite office, but a genuine bridge between traditionally separate domains. That evening, as the team celebrated our successful launch, Michael raised his glass in a toast. To Sarah Wilson, he declared, who taught a technology company to respect manufacturing wisdom while helping manufacturing executives embrace technological possibilities. The integration visionary we didn't know we needed. The characterization prompted reflection as congratulations flowed around me. When I'd left Wilson Manufacturing, I'd defined myself primarily in opposition, rejecting nepotism, hierarchy, and limitation. The journey since had transformed that reactive stance into something more integrated, a professional identity that honored valuable aspects of my manufacturing heritage while embracing technological possibilities. The final test had not been merely surviving my father's presence at today's event, or even navigating potential business collaboration between Vertex and Wilson. It had been demonstrating to myself that I could engage with my past without being diminished by it, that I could incorporate valuable foundations while building new structures better aligned with my capabilities and vision. Later that night, Alone in my temporary Chicago apartment, I stood at the window overlooking the familiar skyline of my hometown. The city appeared unchanged, its architectural landmarks illuminated against the night sky, just as they had been throughout my childhood. An early career, yet my perspective had shifted fundamentally, no longer viewing Chicago through the lens of Wilson Manufacturing's interests or my place within family hierarchy. My phone chimed with a message from Lisa. Heard the launch was a triumph, especially the unexpected Wilson Manufacturing connection. Full circle moment? Not a circle, I reflected as I considered my response, but a spiral, returning to similar territory at a different level with expanded perspective that transformed the experience. I had left Chicago believing I needed to escape my past to find my future. What I'd discovered instead was the power of integration, creating something new that honored valuable foundations while embracing possibilities that pointed forward. Not full circle, I texted back. More like building a bridge between who I was and who I'm becoming. The 10-meter investment crisis turned out to be the catalyst I needed, though I couldn't have imagined it at the time. Her response came quickly. Sometimes the biggest gifts come disguised as our greatest challenges. The question is whether we're brave enough to unwrap them. As I set my phone aside, I realized the journey wasn't ending, but evolving. Continuing transformation, rather, than final destination. The integration philosophy I'd been developing applied not just to manufacturing technology, but to personal identity. Honoring roots while growing branches, building bridges rather than walls, finding strength in connection rather than opposition. The final test had been passed not by rejecting my past or by returning to it unchanged, but by transforming both it and myself into something new and more whole. A bridge between worlds that once seemed impossibly distant, now connected through the person I had become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.